Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you on a journey, not just through words, but through truth. A truth that's been forgotten, overlooked, and often tossed aside in a world that treats sacred things like disposable ones. I want to talk to you today about marriage, not as the world defines it, not as culture reshapes it, not as convenience manipulates it, but as God designed it. Because marriage is not a contract, marriage is a covenant. See, a contract is based on mutual distrust. A contract says, I'll hold up my end as long as you hold up yours. It's built on performance, backed by clauses and enforced by lawyers. But a covenant, oh, that's something different. A covenant is based on commitment. It is based on trust. It's based on a vow that isn't just made to each other, but made before God. A covenant says, even when you fall short, I'll stand firm. Even when it hurts, I'll remain. Even when it's hard, I'll be faithful. We live in a generation that has confused love with emotion, commitment with convenience, and vows with vibes. But you don't make a covenant because you feel like it. You make a covenant because God calls you to it. Contracts are written in ink, but covenants are written in blood. When Jesus hung on that cross, he didn't sign a contract with his people. He sealed a covenant with his life. And he calls marriage to reflect that same selfless, sacrificial, unbreakable love. The problem is, too many are walking down the aisle with a contract mentality. I'll stay as long as you make me happy. I'll love you as long as you stay the way I like. That's not marriage. That's a business deal. But you can't run a covenant like a contract and expect it to last. When God joins two together, he's not making a deal, he's performing a miracle. He's taking two separate lives and weaving them into one flesh, one purpose, one destiny. And what God has joined together, let no man, no bitterness, no boredom, no betrayal tear apart. Marriage is a covenant, not a contract. That one statement carries the weight of eternity. It stands in contrast to how our modern world views relationships. Today, marriage is often treated like a temporary arrangement, something that can be changed, canceled, or walked away from when it no longer serves our interests. But that is not the original design. That is not how God intended marriage to be. Marriage is sacred. Marriage is spiritual. Marriage is a covenant, a divine union, created and sustained by God himself. When two people enter into marriage, they are not just signing a legal document or making a social statement. They are entering into a holy agreement before God. It is a vow spoken in the presence of heaven and sealed by divine authority. A contract might require signatures. A covenant requires surrender. A contract might last until a clause is broken. A covenant lasts until death parts the two. In a contract, both parties are looking to protect their rights. In a covenant, both parties are laying down their rights to love and serve one another selflessly. This is why the Bible doesn't describe marriage as a contract, but as a covenant. Malachi 2:14 says, the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth. She is your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant. That means God isn't just a spectator, he's a participant. He's involved in that union. That's why it matters how we treat our spouse. It's not just about them, it's about how we honor the covenant we made before God. When you see marriage as a contract, you approach it with conditions. I'll stay if you make me happy. I'll love you if you meet my needs. I'll commit as long as it benefits me. But covenant says, I will love you even when it's hard. I will honor you even when you disappoint me. I will stay because I vowed, not because I feel. Covenant love isn't cheap. It costs something. It demands faithfulness, forgiveness, patience, and perseverance. But what you receive in return is priceless. Deep intimacy, spiritual unity, and the blessing of God's presence in your home. God never intended marriage to be driven by convenience. He designed it to be anchored by covenant. That's why the enemy fights so hard to destroy marriages, because covenant reflects the character of God. When you live out a covenant marriage, you're preaching a sermon without saying a word. You're showing the world what unconditional love looks like. You're showing what grace looks like in action. You're revealing God's nature to your children, your community, and even to each other. So when the storms come, and they will, you don't tear up the covenant. You remember it. You stand on it. Because marriage isn't about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right partner. It's about living out the truth that real love doesn't quit. Real love doesn't break contracts. It keeps covenants. Contracts are based on performance. Covenants are based on commitment. This distinction is critical when understanding the true foundation of marriage. In our society, contracts are made every day. Business deals, service agreements, leases, each one is built on a condition. If you do your part, I'll do mine. If either party fails to meet expectations, the contract can be canceled or voided. It's a transaction, not a relationship. That mindset has crept into how people view marriage. They treat their spouse like a business partner with a performance checklist in hand. Make me happy, meet my needs, never fail me, and I'll stay. But marriage as designed by God is not built on performance. It's built on commitment. A covenant says, I choose to love you even when you fall short. It's a vow to remain faithful, not because the other person always gets it right, but because you have chosen to do what's right. In a covenant, you're not looking for loopholes or escape clauses. You're looking for grace, forgiveness, and faithfulness. Because in a covenant, love is not earned by performance, it's given by commitment. Performance-based love is dangerous because it is fragile. It only lasts as long as everything goes well. The moment one spouse makes a mistake, falls into weakness, or doesn't meet expectations, love starts to fade. Resentment creeps in. Disappointment grows. Distance forms. That's because the love was conditional. It depended on performance. But covenant love says, I'm not going anywhere, even when it gets messy. That kind of love is unshakable. It's rooted not in how well your spouse performs, but in how deeply you are committed to the promise you made. God didn't love us because we performed well. He loved us while we were yet sinners. His covenant with us was not dependent on our perfection. In fact, he sent Jesus because we couldn't perform well enough. That's the kind of love he calls us to in marriage. A love that reflects him, a love that stays, a love that forgives 70 times 7, a love that says, even when you're weak, I'll be strong for both of us. When a husband and wife both enter marriage with a covenant mindset, they are not waiting to see how the other performs. They are focused on how they can serve, how they can honor their vow, how they can remain faithful to what they committed to. That kind of foundation can weather any storm. It doesn't crumble under pressure because it wasn't built on fragile expectations. It was built on unshakable commitment. That's why vows don't say, I promise to love you as long as you do everything right. They say for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health. That's covenant language. That's commitment over performance. And that's the kind of love that turns a marriage into a testimony of God's faithfulness. A covenant involves God. It's a spiritual vow, not just a legal agreement. This truth elevates marriage far above the civil documents and ceremonies that often define it today. While governments may issue marriage licenses and societies may celebrate weddings with lavish events, the true essence of marriage is not found in paperwork or pageantry. It is found in the presence of God. Marriage is not simply between two people. It is a sacred triangle, husband, wife, and God. When a man and woman say, I do, they are not only making a promise to each other, They are entering into a holy agreement before the creator of the universe. That's what makes marriage a covenant. It's spiritual at its core. God is not a passive observer at a wedding ceremony. He is an active witness and participant. He hears every vow. He sees every promise. And he holds every couple accountable to what they declare in his name. This is why Scripture repeatedly speaks of marriage as a divine institution. From the very beginning in Genesis, we read that God himself performed the first marriage when he brought Eve to Adam. He didn't just suggest they live together. He joined them. He ordained the union. And that union was never meant to be casual or conditional. It was meant to be holy and lasting. A legal agreement may outline the rights and responsibilities of each party, but it cannot define the spiritual weight of a covenant. Courts can dissolve contracts, but no court on earth has the authority to dissolve what God has joined together in covenant. Jesus said in Matthew 19:6, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." That's a clear reminder that God is the one doing the joining, and it's not something to be undone lightly. When couples view marriage as only a legal agreement, they tend to treat it with a consumer mindset. If it stops benefiting them, they believe they have the right to walk away. But when marriage is seen as a spiritual vow, it shifts the focus from rights to responsibility, from convenience to calling. It becomes less about what I'm getting and more about what I'm giving. It becomes an act of worship, not just a life decision. It becomes a platform for glorifying God, not just a pursuit of personal happiness. This is why keeping God at the center of marriage is essential. Without him, the relationship can drift into selfishness, resentment, and brokenness. But with him, it becomes a place of healing, grace, and purpose. God's presence in a marriage is what sustains it when feelings fade and trials come. He provides the strength to forgive, the wisdom to communicate, and the love to endure. So when we say marriage is a covenant, we are acknowledging that it belongs to God. He designed it, he witnesses it, and he sustains it. And when we honor it as such, we invite his favor, his power, and his presence into our lives. Covenant love chooses even when feelings fade. That is one of the most powerful and countercultural truths about marriage. In a world that chases emotion, thrill, and chemistry, covenant love stands firm as a deeper, more enduring kind of love. It is not based on how someone makes you feel in the moment, but on the commitment you made, regardless of how you feel. Feelings are real, but they are also fleeting. Emotions shift. Seasons change, people grow and evolve, and if your marriage is only as strong as your feelings, it will crumble when those feelings fade. But covenant love doesn't depend on emotion. It is rooted in decision. Covenant love says, I choose you today, and I'll choose you tomorrow, even if today was hard. It's the choice to stay, even when walking away feels easier. It's the decision to keep loving when you're tired, frustrated, or wounded. That kind of love reflects God's love for us. He didn't stop loving when we messed up. He didn't pull back when we were difficult to deal with. He chose us over and over, not because we were always lovable, but because his love wasn't based on our performance, it was based on his promise. In marriage, there will be days when romance fades, when misunderstandings create tension, and when life feels more like survival than celebration. But covenant love looks past the temporary and anchors itself in the eternal. It says, I remember what we promised. I remember why we began this journey. And I'm staying committed, not because I feel like it, but because I vowed to. That's not weakness, that's strength. That's not settling, that's building something unshakable. Culture tells us that love is supposed to be effortless, that passion should always be present, and that if it's hard, it must be wrong. But the truth is, real love, the kind that mirrors God's covenant love, is hard. It requires sacrifice. It demands forgiveness. It calls for patience, endurance, and grace. And those things aren't always accompanied by warm, fuzzy feelings, but they are the ingredients of a love that lasts. Feelings can be reignited, but only when there is faithfulness. Passion can return, but only where trust remains. Emotional connection can deepen, but only in the soil of consistent commitment. That's why choosing your spouse daily is so powerful. It creates safety. It fosters intimacy. It communicates. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be present. That kind of love is rare, but is exactly what God intended for marriage. It doesn't chase feelings, it builds a foundation. It doesn't give up in dry seasons, it waters the ground. It doesn't run at the first sign of difficulty, it digs in and fights for the relationship. Covenant love is the kind of love that says, even when I don't feel it, I will still live it. And in doing so, it becomes stronger, deeper, and more beautiful with time. Marriage reflects Christ's sacrificial relationship with the church. This isn't just a poetic comparison. It is a divine blueprint. When God designed marriage, he didn't create it to simply be a partnership or a way for people to live together. He created it to reveal something greater, a living picture of Christ's love for his bride, the church. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That is not casual language. That is covenant love in action. Sacrificial, selfless, and unconditional. Jesus didn't love the church because she was always faithful, always lovely, or always appreciative. He loved her through her failures, through her rebellion, and through her brokenness. And how did he show that love? By giving his life. That is the model God gives for husbands to love their wives, and by extension, the tone he sets for the entire marriage covenant. It's a calling to mirror that same sacrificial love, to be willing to give, to serve, to forgive, not because your spouse deserves it every day, but because that is what Christ did for you. Marriage, then, is not just about companionship. It is not just about romance or mutual benefit. It is a stage on which the gospel is lived out. Every act of grace in marriage reflects God's grace. Every moment of forgiveness mirrors the cross. Every decision to stay, to serve, and to love when it's hard points to the faithfulness of Jesus. That's why marriage is sacred. That's why it matters so much to God. Because when a husband and wife live out sacrificial love, they are preaching a sermon without using words. This also means that marriage isn't about getting your way. It's about giving yourself away. In a Christ-reflecting marriage, both spouses look not to be served, but to serve. That doesn't mean there's no joy or mutual care. In fact, the deepest joy comes when both people are committed to putting each other first. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. In marriage, that may not mean physical death, but it will often mean dying to pride, to selfishness, and to personal comfort for the sake of the other. When a marriage truly reflects Christ and the church, it becomes a witness to the world. It says, love doesn't quit. Love doesn't give up. Love gives and gives again. It teaches children what grace looks like. It shows neighbors what real commitment means. It brings glory to God because it reveals his heart in the most intimate relationship he created. This is why marriage must be approached with reverence, humility, and purpose. It's not just a union, it's a calling to love like Jesus loved, to serve like he served, and to commit like he committed, even to the point of laying down his life. When we embrace that calling, marriage becomes more than a relationship. It becomes a reflection of the greatest love story ever told. Covenant endures through conflict, pain, and imperfection. This is one of the defining marks of a God-centered marriage. While many expect marriage to be a smooth path of constant affection and alignment, the reality is much different. Real marriage encounters storms. There will be arguments, misunderstandings, disappointments, and even seasons of emotional distance. But covenant doesn't retreat in those moments. It remains. Covenant doesn't wait for perfection. It thrives in the process of growth, healing, and restoration. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about marriage is that difficulty means something is broken. But in truth, difficulty is a part of every meaningful relationship. The presence of conflict or pain doesn't signal failure, it signals humanity. Two people with different pasts, personalities, and perspectives will inevitably clash. But covenant doesn't say, I'm done because this is hard. It says, I'm staying because this is worth fighting for. The power of covenant is not in avoiding trouble, but in walking through it together. When a couple embraces covenant love, they accept the truth that there will be moments of deep pain, times when trust is tested, when hopes are challenged, when mistakes are made. But instead of tearing each other down, covenant builds a bridge. Instead of running away, it leans in. Covenant says, I still choose you. I still believe in what God has put together. It's in the imperfection that love becomes real. Anyone can love when things are easy, when the days are bright and the connection feels effortless. But covenant love shines the brightest in the dark. It holds on when it would be easier to let go. It speaks life when silence feels safer. It forgives when bitterness wants to take root. This kind of love reflects the heart of God. He didn't abandon his people when they were unfaithful. He pursued them. He corrected them. He stayed with them, committed to the covenant he made. Covenant love is not blind to imperfection. It sees clearly and chooses anyway. It doesn't gloss over flaws or pretend problems don't exist. Instead, it faces them with courage and it works through them with grace. It understands that every conflict is an opportunity to grow, every wound a place for healing, and every setback a chance to rebuild stronger. This enduring love is not possible in human strength alone. It requires the presence and power of God. When both spouses invite God into the hard places, he brings peace where there was chaos. He brings wisdom where there was confusion. He brings hope where there was despair. Covenant doesn't just survive the storms. It comes out of them refined, renewed, and more united than before. So don't be discouraged by imperfection in your marriage. Don't panic when conflict arises. Don't walk away because pain shows up. Covenant was made for these moments. It was designed to endure. And with God at the center, it doesn't just endure, it transforms. Through every trial, covenant love declares, I'm still here, I'm still committed, and I still believe in us. True covenant love redeems, restores, and remains. This is the kind of love that doesn't give up when things fall apart. It builds again. It doesn't just endure pain, it heals through it. In a world where people are quick to leave when brokenness appears, covenant love leans into the brokenness with the intent to make it whole. This is the love that comes from God. It is not shallow, not fragile, not based on fleeting emotions. It is deep, strong, and anchored in a divine promise. Redemption means taking what was lost, what was broken, and bringing it back to life. That's what God's love does for us. And that's what covenant love does in a marriage. No matter how far things have drifted, no matter how wounded the relationship may be, covenant love doesn't say this is beyond repair. It says with God there's still hope. It acknowledges the hurt, but refuses to let the hurt have the final word. It sees the damage, but believes in the power of grace to rebuild. It chooses to believe that what seems dead can live again. Restoration takes time and it takes humility. Covenant love is willing to go through the process. It doesn't rush healing. It doesn't fake peace. It does the hard work of listening, repenting, forgiving, and trusting again. Restoration means bringing the relationship back to its intended purpose, back to unity, back to joy, back to a place of safety and oneness. Covenant love understands that people will fail, but that failure doesn't have to define the future. With God at the center, there is always a path to restoration. This love also remains. It stays. It shows up day after day, even when emotions are low and circumstances are difficult. It isn't based on performance or perfection. It is rooted in faithfulness. Remaining doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means facing it together. It's the daily choice to say, I'm not going anywhere. That kind of consistency builds trust. It brings stability. It reassures your spouse that no matter what comes, you're standing with them. We see this kind of love throughout Scripture. God's people wandered, rebelled, and broke their promises, and yet He never abandoned them. He redeemed them. He restored them. And He remained faithful even when they were faithless. That's the model for covenant marriage. A love that mirrors the heart of God. A love that doesn't throw people away. A love that picks up the broken pieces and creates something more beautiful than before. Covenant love turns pain into purpose. It turns trials into testimonies. It turns brokenness into beauty. It doesn't deny the struggle, it transforms it. And when both spouses commit to that kind of love, their marriage becomes more than a relationship. It becomes a testimony of God's redemptive power, a witness to what grace can do, a legacy of love that will outlast the storms because it is rooted not in human effort, but in God's eternal covenant. So today, if you've been looking at marriage through the lens of culture, convenience, or contracts, it's time to shift your vision. Marriage is not just a ceremony or a signature. It's a covenant. It's a divine calling to love beyond feeling, to serve beyond comfort, and to stay beyond struggle. It is a sacred reflection of God's unwavering love for us, a love that redeems, restores, and remains. This kind of marriage doesn't just survive the test of time. It glorifies God through the test of time. And when we treat our vows with the reverence they deserve, when we build on the foundation of covenant, not contract, we don't just build stronger homes, we build holy ones. Homes filled with grace, anchored in faith, and marked by a love that won't quit. Let your marriage be more than an agreement. Let it be a testimony. Let it be a covenant that echoes the heart of heaven. And when it is, you won't just be living with your spouse. You'll be walking out the purpose of God together for the world to see.